A final budget deal reached, greater oversight of the IEDC, plus subsidizing nuclear reactors, and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending April 25th, 2025.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality of life.
This week, Republican leaders made up a $2 billion budget revenue shortfall by raising the cigarette tax, cutting public health and higher education funding, and spending down budget reserves. Republican leaders say they started closing the revenue shortfall by making cuts and then turned to a $2 per pack cigarette tax increase to finish closing the gap. Senate Leader Roderick Bray says that tax hike will also help people stop smoking or prevent them from starting in the first place.
I think it's going to have a huge benefit for the Medicaid costs going forward.
But Democratic Representative Greg Porter says cutting local public health funding down to $40 million a year from $150 million this year is very disappointing.
Is that making Indiana healthy again? Or I think it's making us extremely vulnerable when it comes to health care.
Higher education institutions will receive a 5% cut to their primary funding, along with a 5% cut to the dollars they use to maintain buildings. Does this budget make the best of a bad situation? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Mike O'Brien, John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers, and Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting State House Bureau Chief Brandon Smith, and if Niki and I in particular look a little more tired than usual today, it's because lawmakers finished the legislative session less than 12 hours before we tape this show, a little after 1:30 in the morning, so yeah, it's been a bit of a short and long day at the same time. Ann DeLaney, they finished with the budget. Does it make the best of a bad situation?
Well, it is a bad situation. There's no question about that. And the cigarette tax increase is something that should have occurred a decade ago. So that's good. But they are so short-sighted. And the Republican priorities to protect business and to protect the rich are ingrained in this budget. I know that the vouchers for millionaires isn't taking effect this year, but it's guaranteed to take effect next year. And the business personal property tax is suspended for this year, but it's doubled for next year. So those are protected. On the other hand, we finally got to the point where we were beginning to fund public health. And we were seeing results from that funding, and they have decimated that. At the same time, they complain about Medicaid being so expensive and health care costs in general being so expensive. They don't put the little bit of money in advance to help cut that off. And the other one that's absolutely appalling, besides the higher ed cuts, is the child care. We have been doing little tiny steps to increase the state support for child care, which is a huge impediment for many families, and particularly to increase the workforce. And we finally got to 72,000 children on that program, and now we're going to cut it back by 20,000. I mean, talk about short-sighted. That's what this budget is. They are guaranteeing, or not guaranteeing, they are betting on the fact that Donald Trump, who, by the way, has tanked the dollar internationally, is going to improve the economy so much that we're not going to have the same problem next year. Let's wait and see.
I want to ask about the voucher expansion, because I think after the revenue forecast last week was so bad, I think a lot of folks kind of assumed it just wouldn't happen this session and that they'd do it in the next budget, assuming the next budget is better, which, dear God, I hope the next budget is better. Are you surprised that even waiting to the second year that it happened at all?
I'm not. I think the governor wanted it. Speaker Houston wanted it. Ryan Mishler didn't want it. It's like this dance we've been doing every 2 years for, forever, since vouchers became a thing. So no, I wasn't surprised they kicked it out. Frankly, I think what they did, you had like 5 minutes to go, oh no, we don't have $2.4 billion we thought we had, right? Like last week, and then you got to pass the budget yesterday. So I think let's paper through the rest of the year, maintain our priorities in year two, but we're back next year. We don't know what's going to happen in 6 months. We don't know what tariffs. We don't know what President Trump's going to do next on tariffs. I mean,
or federal funding,
or any of those things, right? So, and neither does he probably. So let's at least just okay, snapshot in time, we're $2.4 billion down over the next two years and a few months. So let's just maintain our priorities, but maybe delay them, and then we have the opportunity to come back next year. And I think there are good things in this budget that were surprising that they were able to do that they haven't been able to do in previous downturns. We're kind of increase at K-12 education funding by 5%.
For vouchers
in previous budgets, but immediately. In previous recession budgets, pre-recession budgets, that's been hard cut.
Yeah.
The basis.
But you didn't have
vouchers
in previous recession budgets.
And I think if you look at the charts on revenue growth, obviously we've fallen off, but we're only 1% off of growth pre-COVID, and I know we don't want to admit it, but we got really used to having a lot of federal money flowing around.
2 straight budgets of that.
Well, you had 26% revenue growth in the last biennium. That's all federal money, and we got pretty used to living on it.
Rod Bray called crafting this budget the toughest challenge lawmakers have ever faced.
Tough if you do have sacred cows. I mean, if in fact you have these favored programs such as the universal voucher expansion and other sorts of things that are essentially off the table.
Income tax.
It does make it.
They said K-12 was going to be as off the table as they could make it, and it was. It didn't get changed.
What I think this budget reminds us of, this is again an obvious statement that our system, whether you're talking Washington or here, it's based on instant gratification because they face in the House voters every 2 years or in the Senate every 4 years. It doesn't really lend itself to long-term growth and strategy development as a state. So what you see is where the cuts, if you were focused on the future and building a healthier, more robust Indiana, literally and economically, it seems to me you wouldn't cut child care. You wouldn't cut our research institutions and other higher education institutions, which are grooming people for this workforce, which we often talk about how we need to have people for that workforce.
It was pointed out. You talk about not just education at these universities, but also the research that they do, because theoretical research becomes applied research becomes economic development.
You look at commercialization. There's a
this
huge
isn't a reason to do it, but you do in these times look at people and go, higher ed can weather that. They're not cutting. And in health, we didn't cut spending. We reduced it down to what's being spent. So they're not going to grow it.
But on this notion of instant gratification, or at least immediate avoidance of pain, the same thing with public health. The most obvious example where you cut from 100 to $1 million to 40 million. And
they cut to what was being spent, though.
Yeah, but they needed time to get up, and they needed resources to get there.
But in this environment, hit the pause button.
But it's...
they didn't pause it, though.
There was some interesting justification, but I think it does remind us, not that any of us needed reminding, that it's all about what can I go this week, next week, when I wake up from my slumber and go to voters down at the coffee shop and face them, what can I tell them? They don't want to, and it's not necessarily legislators' fault that no one wants to hear what they're doing for 10 years down the road.
It's interesting to me, too, on that subject, because if you listen to the final debate on the budget in the House and the final debate in the Senate, you got wildly different messages from the people who wrote those budgets in the House and the Senate.
It really was. Representative Thompson, he picked his theme, and it was freedom, although I never really understood the theme to the budget, but it was freedom, and he was very clear about that, and he was pretty excited about the budget.
He was very passionate about it.
And then, we move over to the Senate, and Senator Mishler, he's just a lot more, even keel, and he said, look, I don't think there's a lot of people who are going to see that this is a win, but it's what we had to do to get through.
Yeah.
And that is what they did. There are definitely positives and negatives in there for various constituencies. They are going to take a hit on the cigarette tax increase that just is not really appreciated in conservative circles, including lawmakers who have taken no tax increase pledges. So,
then I think I remember the same sort of conversations happening when they did the big road funding package in 2017.
Right.
And I don't think we really saw a lot of electoral
No,
fallout.
you didn't. There's one positive thing from that budget, though. The increase that Lieutenant Governor Beckwith asked for to do his conversion therapy through faith was not approved. That's a positive.
Lawmakers were also very excited about the oversight of the Secretary of State's office.
Is now the right time to plug everyone increasing their personal contribution to WFYI?
Yes.
Well, that is
good idea.
I mean, we talk about things that are short-sighted and talk about building for the future, literally where we can help kids learn, to supplement what they're getting at school. That's why PBS, Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Well, maybe not. We don't want to teach them the bad stuff. But
I don't know. I don't know that we have a ton of kids.
No, not the
part
civics
of our
lesson
audience.
that we often talk about. But I think when we talk about the freedom agenda, we're probably overlooking the obvious. You got to have some appreciation for the freedom from reality, which is maybe part of it too.
That could be a good part of it.
All right. Following a series of internal investigations into the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, the Braun administration is launching a forensic audit. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Lauren Chapman reports Secretary of Commerce David Adams says there are enough questions that a comprehensive look is necessary.
The Hannah News Service published an investigation earlier this week detailing allegations of ethics violations and self-dealing by staffers employed by IEDC-affiliated organizations. Adams says the administration doesn't yet have a complete scope of those allegations, but an independent forensic audit would fill in those missing parts.
This forensic audit is a very different type of audit that's looking beyond the financials, but is looking into specific transactions as well as processes.
Governor Mike Braun says the IEDC has filed the financial reports he demanded in an April 8th executive order.
We are on our way to greater transparency in that regard.
The forensic audit will be paid for by IEDC funds and is expected to take between 6 and 12 months to complete.
Mike O'Brien, we've talked on this show, and there's been a lot of conversation for a few years about transparency and oversight at the IEDC. How big a step towards greater oversight of that agency is this?
Well, I think it's going to have to be a big one, and good for Mike Braun, Governor Braun, being this upfront this quickly about it once they kind of discovered what was potentially going on over there. Look, I think the concept with this, venture capital firm, created back in 2011, that's the reason the IEDC exists. It's doing things that state government can't do, right? But that does need transparency. It does need oversight. It does need appropriate guardrails. And I think one of the people I think in that report looked the best was the former Secretary of Commerce, David Rosenberg, who clearly was like ringing the bell on this thing and not willing to go forward to allow the people at that firm to either become fiduciaries of taxpayer money or make an unreasonable and inappropriate amount of money off the fund. So we're going to find out a lot more in the next few months. But good for the Braun administration for pulling back the curtain on it.
Yeah, is this time to applaud Mike Braun for taking the right steps?
I think it's a good idea. It's something that's long overdue. But the interesting thing to me is the use of the term forensic. To me, that implies potential criminal activity. And when you've got the three entities that are out there dealing with all of this, and I don't know how many of them wear the two hats in that group. And if you have the potential for self-dealing, when you've got that amount of money being sent under I don't want to say under the table, but without the public scrutiny, the potential for abuse is substantial. But the use of the term forensic raises questions in my mind as to whether there's potential criminal activity.
Well, it certainly means they're taking it seriously, if nothing else. We started to see lawmakers push back a little bit, even before this all came out, at least publicly. In the budget, really started to see lawmakers start to really push back against the IEDC, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it in a couple bills this year. There was another bill that had some IEDC oversight in terms of land purchases and giving more information on these innovation development districts that they have. Now, obviously, they've cut some of their funding. I think they're saying, along with the 5% cuts that they've tried to do with most general government.
Yeah, they said they cut the IEDC funding by
25 to 30%.
Yeah.
So I definitely think people are getting concerned at the massive amounts of money that flow through there, and what metrics are we actually using, and like Ann said, the self-dealing, the who is getting benefits enriched. Yeah, that's a big one that will come out of that
if you're
audit.
the Braun administration, you couldn't ask for a better scenario than this, because you've been trying to distinguish yourself from the previous administration, also a Republican administration. There has been this ongoing drumbeat, as you point out, about IEDC needs to be reined in a little bit more, have oversight. It needs to not focus on certain areas. Whether it does or doesn't is debatable, but the notion it needs to be spread around the state, more local control, more of a focus on agriculture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So to have a crisis or something where you can appear to be the fixer, you're going to come in, you're going to pull back the curtains, you're going to get to the bottom of this. You can look like you're the white knight that way. And then, you can, again, draw that line with whatever happened before. You can say, oh, well, if the LEAP district or whatever projects were undertaken by IEDC.
I think that's what triggered it. The combination of the lack of planning on the water and the finding out that they were paying $100,000 an acre for farm ground, I think started
there's no bad side for this administration. I don't think.
No. In fact, it's to his benefit. He campaigned on it.
Mike Braun was talking months and months, in the campaign.
It was a big
and he
issue.
was not the only one, but talking about a fundamental shift in the state's economic development strategy. This sort of thing makes that sort of thing even easier to say.
Whoever said, don't let a crisis go to waste, this is an example, All
right, time now for viewer feedback. Each week, we pose an unscientific online poll question, and this week's question is there adequate oversight of the Indiana Economic Development Corporation? A, yes, or B, no. Last week's question was, should lawmakers raise some taxes like those on cigarettes and alcohol to help avoid some budget cuts? 82% of you said yes, 18% said no. Apparently lawmakers were listening. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to wfyi.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Well, a bill that could keep coal plants online and give tax incentives to small modular nuclear reactors headed to the governor's desk this week. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Rebecca Thiel reports some lawmakers question whether Hoosiers should pay for those incentives with a $2 billion shortfall in the state budget.
The bill would allow a company that manufactures small nuclear plants to claim a 20% tax credit, a minimum of $280 million. Democratic Representative Matt Pierce asked the House to revise the bill.
Imagine what we could do with $280 million when it comes to providing people with health care, child care, other essential services that people may rely upon the state for.
That's about twice the amount lawmakers have been budgeting for local public health services this session. The author of the bill says it would help Indiana compete with other states for hundreds of good-paying jobs. The bill also requires utilities that want to close a coal plant to replace it with the same amount of energy capacity or more. That could put cleaner energy sources at a disadvantage.
Niki Kelly, it's all about context and timing. Does that tax credit look bad this particular year?
Yeah, although I will say that besides property taxes, the thing most people want to talk to me about sometimes are their electric bills. And so they're kind of throwing everything against the wall, at this thing to try to figure out a way to increase reliability and affordability on this front. I will say in terms of tax credits, it was very interesting yesterday to see a tax credit that didn't make it, or exemption that didn't make it in the budget, which is the pink tax on menstrual products and adult diapers. That did not make it. But later in a different bill, they did approve a tax exemption for agricultural trade associations who sell things at the fair. So,
Wow.
It's
in the swine barn.
Yeah, exactly.
It all comes home to roost.
So it's always interesting to watch, which tax incentives are given and which aren't.
And to be fair to this, I don't think we're gonna. I would be surprised if companies start getting this tax credit within this current budget cycle, because it still feels like SMR, the nuclear reactor technology, is more than a few years away.
Well, I think proof of that is, and it's interesting that some of the people supporting this said we need to remain competitive and be at the forefront. Well, no state in the country has these.
One.
So Russia and China have them, and I guess we're going to be right there at number 3. But it is interesting, the embrace of this. I'm not a scientist, but now that we know that solar power and wind are, major cause of cancer and other, we can rely on safe nuclear reactions and fusion, nuclear fission or fusion, which is it? I forget that part too.
Okay.
To safely bring us to the future.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I'm not trying to knock nuclear. I don't know enough. This is apparently safe technology, but
Hopefully.
well, certainly safer than wind.
I will say this. Something that struck me, I think it might have been Representative Matt Pierce brought it on the floor. The lawmakers are really all in on the SMR stuff too, because there was, I think, another bill that had to do with local siting of these things. And it was basically like the locals can't really oppose an SMR going in wherever it wants. But on wind and solar, lawmakers have all of the options to oppose that stuff. Does that make sense if we're trying to embrace the all-of-the-above strategy?
They tried to address siting, right? And they have for several years.
They have. Solid bill this year, yeah.
Local
it passed one chamber.
Local
or was about to pass one chamber, yeah.
One thing, I think what we saw pretty quickly, and if you look at renewable energy, or data centers, or battery plants, or all this stuff that the pitchfork crowd shows up and hates and opposes, wind, solar, you name it. What we've seen in the last couple of weeks have been local governments looking at the property tax bill and going, oh no, we're either raising your income taxes, pitchfork crowd, or we're growing our assessed value. So you got to pick now.
Yeah.
So I think that's more likely to change the landscape of energy generation than this tax credit would. Frankly, I mean, Duke, NIPSCO, AES, they're all going to natural gas.
Yeah.
There's other companies coming to the state to build large-scale natural gas plants. Maybe you use this tax credit as you're like walking out the door on coal, but I don't see it making a huge impact.
Yeah, to that point, again, it's sort of on the timing of this. It looks bad because a $280 million at minimum credit in a year when you're cutting so many programs, but this isn't going to happen for a while. It's not going to hit the bottom line of the state for a long time.
It's not going to happen for years. It's not going to happen for years. But the thing that kind of bothers me about this is they can start taking the tax credit immediately as soon as they start constructing. If they ever finish it or not, they don't have to give it back.
Yeah.
You know?
All right. School board elections will become partisan under legislation sent to the governor by the narrowest of margins this week. Indiana will join less than a dozen states that put school board candidates' party affiliation on the ballot. The original bill would have forced all school board candidates to choose a party label and required major party candidates to run in primaries. The final version allows candidates to choose a label for the general election: Republican, Democrat, Independent, or nonpartisan. Republican Senator Gary Braun says it's about transparency.
These school boards control millions of dollars in property taxes. So I would say that alone makes them political.
But Republican Senator Liz Braun says school board candidates' political beliefs have never been an issue where she lives.
Those school board members focus on the policy and how to get our K-12's kids to where they need to be successful citizens in the world.
The Senate approved the bill 26-24. John Schwantes, will a lot change in school board makeup across Indiana?
Some will have to change because there are people who will be barred from running or holding office because of federal regulation, the Hatch Act, and other sorts of things. So that's yes. Others who will say, you know what, I don't want to bang my head against the wall. And this is what used to be a great way to get engaged and give back to the community, don't need it anymore. And you'll probably then have some more strident partisans entering the fray as part of some sort of slate that is bandied about as the answer to all problems. The notion that was put forth here is that the reason we have to have this is a notion of political accountability because they are controlling property taxes. Well, under the voucher plan, a lot of private school boards and unelected officials are controlling hundreds, or let's say tens of millions of dollars of taxes as well. So where's I'm not sure that argument holds water.
You don't see closer votes than this one in the Senate for the most part, especially with a supermajority. Something that struck me this entire time in this debate was Liz Braun has been opposed to it from the beginning. I don't think you could find a more partisan person in the State House than Liz Braun. But she was someone who said when she first ran for school board, she didn't want to be partisan in that role.
And she also made a good point that while some central Indiana districts have gotten very political very quickly, the vast majority of school boards out and about in Indiana are just doing the work, and they're not getting caught up in a lot of these
This will push toward that, though, I think.
And that was one thing that Liz Braun also pushed back on.
I'm in the safest political space you could possibly be in Indiana. I'm for Liz Braun. I agree with Liz Braun.
That is a good thing.
Just imagine what those ballots are going to look like.
Yeah.
I mean, if you say that you're a Republican in Hamilton County, you could have 10 candidates on that ballot. And if you have the judges on that same, we're talking about pages and pages and pages of ballots.
And you have to be one of three things, right? What about?
Four things. You could be a Republican, a Democrat, an independent,
or nothing.
or nonpartisan.
But
I think it will have, it's a
be
blank
blunt.
space.
What about libertarians and others?
I guess they would just fall under independent, I suppose.
Well, I could see that grounds for litigation there if certain parties aren't given their due.
Certainly libertarians who have automatic ballot access in the state of
exactly.
Indiana.
Secretary
it does create a potential problem there.
Well, could be a lawsuit there, I'm guessing.
Oh, fun. We love lawsuits around here. The last thing I'll say is the thing that struck me is I'm surprised. Clearly, the Senate wanted to go further. They wanted to put it in primaries. Do you think this gets resurrected to go further, or are lawmakers done now?
I think this is probably all that they could get through in that. We're
26,
going to see how that's going to go for a
don't push it.
couple years. I mean, they held that bill for several days waiting to get everyone in the room that they needed.
Yeah. All right, that's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Mike O'Brien, John Schwantes of Indiana Lawmakers, and Niki Kelly of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at wfyi.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time because a lot can happen in an Indiana week. The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality of life.